Okay. So, but we're obviously probably not going to be mailing out sample ballots. So.
Okay.
Can I just raise one, it's just a question or concern, and that is the repository, for lack of a better word, of these registration documents. And I'm just raising it as a question. I know some neighborhood councils are better with their record keeping and communication process than others, but we want to make sure it was a robust process, and so I don't know if that's been thought about as far as that everything goes to the department, or a copy goes to the department, or it's on a shared access, but I'm just a little bit concerned about the variations in the...
Can you talk about the documentation for qualification to vote?
No, well, it's kind of related, but no, the registration process. If somebody registers, it turns over to the neighborhood council, and some neighborhood council, oh, we lost that one, right? So, you know, sub to end versus others do it. So I don't know, again, what's going to be required in order for, but it seems like ultimately in order for the vote by the, the online voting to work, it's going to have to get into the system. You know, the voter registration to get into the system so that it's secure. And so somehow, and that'd probably be at the department level, not the neighborhood council.
Well, in order to use a citywide system, you're going to have one system. And if I, in Panorama City, check some person's registration and they bring me, let's say, a Mexican consular card, I just check it and I verify it, and then I go online into the system and say, this person was identified as living here, and then I put my name or whoever it was. I mean, I'm not keeping the record of the neighborhood council. I'm just doing the verification in the field.
So Tony's talking about who does the neighborhood council verify? Does the election administrator verify? Does the city clerk verify?
Well, my gosh, don't have the election administrator verify voters.
I said, we're talking about who verifies. So feedback, you're suggesting that the neighborhood council verifies voters. So Glenn would meet me at the farmer's market, and I would say, hey, once you register to vote, I'd give him my tablet, he would do it, right? You'd send in some paperwork. You want me to verify him in the field? I'm the neighborhood council, right? So I would verify him, and we would accept that the neighborhood council has verified that voter.
That's the question.
Okay. No, well, I'm asking for some your feedback. Tony's feedback is that neighborhood councils would verify their voters, and then we would send them ballots, and you'd also get that data so that you have a robust relationship with them with emails 90, 30, 60, all the way along. Somebody, excuse me, let me back with you, and then we'll go over to Kevin Bob. Okay, anyway, so we can keep working on that, but keep in mind someone's going to be verifying voters. Yes, sir.
You know, I really love that we'll have online voting. As a stakeholder that's involved in many neighborhood councils, this is the best thing that could possibly happen. And the best would be, you know, to see every single one of them engage in it at the next election. The process and the concerns and the problems can easily be addressed. You know, what you have to have if you're going to vote for a resident or a homeowner seat, you're going to have to show a piece of mail that you received at your address. It's not like rocket science or confidential information, but Glenn's important, and any of that information should be held by the city for the registration purposes, because if the city clerk's going to run the election again, the city should be the ones that collect the registrations of the voters and verify that they're qualified to vote for the seats on that neighborhood council that they're registering for. And again, that's going to be kind of a nightmare because, you know, one council's all at large, which is great and easy, or the one like mine with 12 different ballots. what was also said by Tony is the neighborhood council's verifying the thing. I don't think that's right, because what you had at the elections was a bunch of volunteers. And the volunteers had a list of what you had to bring in to verify to vote for that seat. Meaning when I came in and I wanted to vote for my property owner's seat, Mr. Kuzman, you'll need your tax bill. Well, I went home and got it, came back later, but you know, that's what I needed. And while I was at it, I brought in my library card or whatever it was, that I could vote for that or this or the other thing. But all that stuff now is contained. That email addresses and the registrations of the person should be shared with the neighborhood council so they can put it in their outreach, so they can send out the newsletters and stuff. But in terms of determining their eligibility to vote for a specific seat or taking their registration, yeah, that should all be a central system within the city. And so this should be something that should be available to every neighborhood council to opt into at the next election. And I say opt into because I know some of them may not feel technologically savvy enough, may not feel they're working together well enough as a team to attempt this. There could be many reasons, you know, there's so many variations. The other part of the online voting came up with the age question about students. You know, stakeholder can be anybody who lives in, works in, or goes to school in. So, you know, I got a niece who's a 5th grader at Granada Elementary. My bylaws at my neighborhood council don't have an age limit on who can be a stakeholder and who can vote.
They should. That's their
Again, I'm just saying, I've read a lot of bylaws, and I don't see in very many bylaws. I'm just bringing up an observed point. I don't see in very many bylaws a restriction on the voting age.
Be attachment B. Attachment B in their bylaws.
Yeah, well, again, some of them are not complete. But again, I'm just saying, what about the 5-year-old that goes to church in the community and gives 10 cents out of his allowance to the donation? They're technically a stakeholder that could vote for a faith-based seat or an at-large seat. I mean, I don't know where the age is, but I'm just saying there are considerations. I know they can be addressed.
Yeah.
I love the idea. I believe it's most important because it will, by having the online, as Tony mentioned, you got to start early, you know, and I mean tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know,
We're starting today. We're talking today.
Yeah.
So, you know, you mentioned a particular group, for example, students. Not all of them have even the student ID. Is what we're
And are their parents stakeholders? The parents don't go to
I
school
agree.
there.
But here's the thing. It would be so great to have that conversation not on election day, as you said, in line. And like Frank, for example, one of the solutions was the teacher brought the classroom. And in some cases, organizations would pre-qualify folks. So the thing we haven't mentioned is, Tony, you belong to the Lions Club? Take the roster 9 months in advance and bring this in and say, this is the roster. So by definition, if they are who they are, like, you got to prove your identity. Now you got to prove, we know who you are, but now you qualify as a stakeholder. Yes, I'm on the Lions Club list. So this is a great outreach opportunity because you partner with every organization active in your community. So every school, we know who the students are, but let's get the principal to give us a roster. We know who the parents are because the parents are registered as part of the school. These are the 2 people that are allowed to, these are the family members that are allowed to pick up the kids. So by definition, they would be, so every organization you belong to, you mentioned the church roster, or the church organization, like, if they would like to participate, we could deal with that in advance, so that they're now partners. So there's a community partners opportunity for us to get out of the day of the election and move on to what's your relationship to the community, and can we establish that in advance? So it's more than just documentation, it's actually the relationship.
Yeah,
That's
that's what's so
strategy.
great about it. It's getting them to communicate
Right.
and be involved with you throughout the whole process.
Right. So rather than
and that there's
obstacle-
no better outreach avenue than getting people involved online, and they love it because they're anonymous, there's no threats. You know, some people can't talk face to face or on the telephone, but if you put them in front of a computer, you can't shut them up.
Yep. So the other thing is, rather than an obstacle for a 5-year-old, it would be a strategy for all 5-year-olds, and we would go to that school then and say, let's make this part of your civics class, right? Which is what Lincoln Heights does. They make it. So we're going to go to Lydia, Captain Bob, and then we'll go to that.
Yes,
Commissioner.
I just have some concerns about the verification by neighborhood council. The reason I say that is because neighborhood councils are made up of volunteers who are already overworked. Many of them are having trouble enough getting these elections together and outreaching for their elections to add another burden to them. So my suggestion would be that the city clerk's office addresses that. Because they do get paid, they could hire more people if they needed to. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I mean, I attend meetings every single night at neighborhood councils, and these people are just so intense with the amount of work they're already doing. And I just don't wanna see them overloaded anymore.
Okay. Tony, we're going to come back to you.
I want to end on our feet, especially because this is not a volunteer thing. This is something that's being put down on them, and we are doing online voting, and now this has to be added. So they are not volunteering for this, and I think that needs to be addressed.
Got it, I got it. Captain Bob.
Never mind, we covered it.
Thank you very much. You're all done.
So
Yes, sir.
let me understand what I just heard. Am I smarter than a 5th grader? Is that what I'm getting to?
Say it again.
Am I smarter than a 5th grader? Or is the 5th grader smarter than me? Who's taking who to the vote, to the polling place? Whether it's online, because, I mean, if you walk outside right now, you'll see how many kids with some kind of something in their hand, doing something electronically. And quite frankly, if any of those kids are doing anything with it, they got me beat. They got me beat. Because I don't know how to do that. I want to know something about online. I look for the closest kid.
Yeah.
Hey, kid, come here. Hand him $1 and get 15 answers. So am I smarter than a 5th grader?
We're smart enough to ask 5th grader to do your work.
You got him to work for less than minimum wage.
Oh, by the way, I got a question from the 5th grader.
Okay, Tony, and then Frank.
Well, actually, Lydia's concern about neighborhood councils not doing registration, the city clerk should do it, brings up my only personal concern about online voting, and that is money. This is a wonderful system we should be doing, but as soon as we ask, let's say the clerk to register everybody with 96 different methods of registering, we get back into the problem which brought elections to the department, which was the cost estimate to the city council from the city clerk to do everything was too high. So I think that we really have to be reasonable about this, and I'm concerned of if online voting costs, I don't know, $2 million, and you guys have said no, we're not going to cost that. That's also money that could be used for other staff in the general manager's department. So there are some trade-offs here within our tiny budgeted world about whether or not online voting is worth the how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars it would cost.
Okay. All right,
You know, I really just to address that in 20 seconds. Actually, in the end, it would be a lot cheaper because you're not using all the paper materials, not taking all the time for people to go from here to there. In the end, online voting is a lot cheaper. That's why Sweden went to it like 30 years ago, 20 years ago.
And we're not taking away the polling booth, we're just adding another way to vote.
Right, that's right.
Sweden, though, is kind of a homogeneous country. And we're talking about the balkanization of Los Angeles into 96 areas. And so I just don't think there's any equivalent in the world where any one registrar registers 96 entities, and then within those entities, some of them are broken into a dozen types, so that you literally end up with hundreds of different qualifications. I don't think there's any equivalency in the world anywhere.
Well, yes and no, and this is where it gets kind of back-endy tech, but when we thought we had an impressive number of ballots, so we have like 350 ballots or 337 ballots, right? But if you think about how many ballots, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, or just tell me when this stuff starts. But when you register based on your address, your ballot's really small and unique. because it may be a bit of that assembly person, a bit of that, when you start slicing and dicing, we're all voting at the presidential level, but then it starts to get crazy all the way down to as you add the layers. And so the thing is, you add the address. So regardless of how I qualify, I live here, I work here, I participate, it's all going to come down to an address, regardless of the participation. So the address has to be, it could be that house where she wrote Gone with the Wind. Okay, I work at that address. Now we have to decide if you live, work, own, or participate. It's one more slice and dice. But it starts off with the address, and then you start applying other criteria, and then the ballot comes out at ATM. I know that sounds easier than perhaps it really is, but keep in mind, it's already happening. So the ballot you get may be different than the person across the street when you vote by mail in our municipal or, we have, the Corner Hollywood Western up here is 2 different council members. It's 3 parts LAPD, 1 part sheriff. It's 4 neighborhood councils. You know, it's kind of a, Hollywood Western. It's kind of a crazy intersection in terms of who do you call.
Stephen, they're not equivalent though, in that they're all based on an address, whereas all those other things are based on categories.
Yeah.
So those categories are wild cards. I can see that you go all the way from president down to your local city council or other office, but they're based on a single criteria, address, whereas all those other things, they're just criteria all over. And so it's not equivalent to say that there are multiple layers on a single address. They're just different qualifications.
The hierarchy is the address. So you put in the address, you get the NC. You put in the 4 categories, and now it tells you what you can vote for, right? In your case, doesn't matter, because it'll always be the same answer, right?
Right.
In this particular case, if I live, I'm getting a live. If I work, I'm getting a work. Keep in mind they may not be the same address, because this is who I am address, this is where I work address, which might be Region 7. Granada Hills has regions you can qualify for, as well as uses. So when I get down to the 4th category, what's my participation? Still has to have an address. And then, is it because I'm Rec and Parks, church,
Horse rider,
teacher, doctor,
community group.
So the thing is, it would be designed same criteria. In other words, it's a series of criteria that will come with an answer, and it may always just come back to the same answer. Or in Greater Wilshire, it may come to multiple ballots, or in Studio City, multiple ballots. And some neighborhood councils will come down to a choice. You'll pick which one you want. So it'll say, beep, 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 and you qualify as a residential or as a work. Pick one. So in Westwood, you don't get 3 ballots if you qualify 3 times, but you have to pick one because you can qualify for all 3. So you see, that's criteria to drive someone on the back end crazy that designs it. But in terms of the complexity, if there's a dozen criteria, we know there are on a ballot with a dozen different, you mentioned community college, LAUSD, council districts, what else is coming in?
Judges, supervisors.
So you see there, we've got a bunch of overlapping, and yes, it's based on 1 address. Here it could be based on 4 addresses, and here it could be based on multiple categories. But it's the same kind of thing. The appropriate ballot will pop out. That's the service the online voting company would provide, is to design that system. Our opportunity now, and we've got to get jumping on this, so here's the opportunity for all of us. You need to take a look at your bylaws. Flat out, immediately, right? Because there should be no surprise about why people are voting or why people aren't voting on election day or when the elections come around. So your attachment B, so take a look at your bylaws, take a look at attachment B. It'll tell you what the qualifications are to vote and what the qualifications are to run as a candidate. And you should take a look now, because if you don't like 14 as the age, you need to change it now. And if you want, so the criteria to look at, are you self-affirmation or documentation? And are you happy with that? Are you committed to vote by mail? It would have to be self-affirmation if we did vote by mail.
What
we got online voting.
We have online voting, we won't be doing vote by mail. As far as the board structure, do you want at-large seats? Do you want to loosen it up? Do you want to change the qualifications to run or to vote? So you're at-large 17 seats, okay? Encino has a few specific seats that,
It's like 7 areas.
But you have-
7 geographical areas.
so you have geographic as well as
11.
youth or interest.
But those are large.
Yeah, so, you know, yours is, you can run for more than one seat, and so it's kind of complicated, you got a lot of ballots, and when the board members find it complicated, I gotta tell you, it's gotta be complicated. If a board member can show up and go, oh my God, I had no idea, I'm running against myself? Okay, that didn't happen. But,
No, it was just.
but it is, because you can run for more than one seat in some neighborhood councils, and Granada Hills is one of them, and then you can qualify for more than one ballot. But the criteria for qualifying is documentation, and some of it's tough to document, because it's not something you always carry around with you.
Can I mention something about the bylaws? For many months, we've been announcing that the deadline for submitting proposed revised bylaws was March 1st, and that it was anticipated that they would be approved, disapproved, and massaged by June 1st, but May 1st. But the latest newsletter that went out said there's a moratorium effective, and I think it said May 1st, or maybe it said June 1st, and it's not clear, is the moratorium for submitting or moratorium for what? Because previously, we had announced that it was 1 March, and it wasn't clear if it got extended, or if they're just citing the target date for when they're all gonna be completed, and once the March submissions are approved or disapproved, then there's a moratorium. It wasn't clear.
So just to answer your question really quickly, May 1st is the deadline
For submitting?
for submitting, and then the moratorium starts on May 2nd.
Okay.
And then the last.
So you extended it 60 days from March to May.
It's still within May, so maybe
Since it was announced.
yeah.
Okay, so bylaw revisions are coming up quickly. You've only got 3 months in practical terms, which means you need to talk about this upcoming meeting. And the conversation starts with, how we doing? You've got to ask, are you happy with our attachment B, our bylaws as they refer to elections, how they stand now? So you look happy, be an easy conversation. Others learn things from before, but when board members are surprised about who gets to vote and who gets to run and the process for the elections, then there's a significant disconnect between the board members and their bylaws. So you've got to take a look at the bylaws. Of the challenges that came in, a significant amount were on candidates. And of those, some were challenges like, I can't believe people who don't live in the neighborhood are voting. That's the challenge.
Voting or candidates?
I'm sorry, that they don't live here as candidates, right? So they're challenging the credibility of candidates based on their desire that only a homeowner that I know would run. So these standards don't exist. So you can't challenge unless you have that standard, like Mar Vista and Palms. They want to see a petition from stakeholders that you've actually participated in the neighborhood and gotten the signatures. That's a standard that exists, but if it isn't a standard, you can't rely on it as a challenge. The other one was voters, and so a lot of people were shocked that like the parents of children in the school were voting. So there's some challenges based on that. Again, take a look at your bylaws and be specific on who's voting for what, so there's no surprises. So of the challenges, a lot of it can be addressed by really dialing in on your bylaws and being clear that what you want is what you're getting. There shouldn't be surprises at the polling place. And the other thing is, so bylaws, and the other thing is election committee, outreach committee. May or may not be the same people, but your outreach committee is probably going to be going all the time, and it looks like election committee will be going all the time also, so they want to divide them up. But they should be working together. But you should have those two committees in place ASAP, so on Monday we can start working with the lead on elections and the lead on outreach. And the other thing is your budget. You should start planning now, but the budget package for 2015-16 starts July 1st. That's the July 1st budget. So as your upcoming budget packet If it's not in the budget, it's not happening. So if you don't budget for it, it ain't gonna happen. So if you have this desire to do outreach, so we go back and forth, Mr. Cooper. If you have a desire to commit to an outreach program and you've got $100, you mentioned 100. So if you're giving all your money to the sprinkler, the local police station, and you can't get $100 for the local event, and you don't have any money for outreach, then there's no chance that there's going to be any outreach. Don't even pretend that the outreach plan is serious. So, yes, sir.
So which bylaws are we going to refer to? The ones of the council, or excuse me, or the ones of the school? Oh, wait a minute. Or the ones of the next door neighbor? Whose bylaws?
So the neighborhood council bylaws.
Which neighborhood?
So your neighborhood council. So you're going to go back to West Hills. Even if you are certain you're happy, and you are the happiest guy in the neighborhood council system, but even if you're committed that you're certain that you're happy, get the bylaws out there and just say, is everybody as happy as me? Just so we're all in agreement. We have 17 seats. They're at large. It's self-affirmation. Come one, come all. We throw a big party. We invite people to come vote. But really, we're happy with how the qualifications to run and the qualifications to vote. And this is what we would like to repeat or change. Okay? So if you want to change it, if there's something you want to change, think hard now. What's the stuff you loved? Let's make sure it's in there. What's the stuff that you just think was, we fell short on it? Let's get it in there. Okay? And then if you think about the challenges that we have, you mentioned location. I mean, this is where your election committee and your outreach committee can start planning now. What's that location look like? But for us to be fussing around close to the line, finding an appropriate location is tragic because we know it's coming. It's 2016. It's about a year from now. So, Mr. Kuzman, then Tony, then Lydia.
I got to go back to the budget requirements. Last year when my residential neighborhood council was doing their budget, they did not know that there was a requirement that 10% of their budget be allocated towards the election for the upcoming election year. They did not know. Mr. Bailey happened to be there that night and let them know that they had to give at least 10% of their budget to the election.
Strongly recommended.
Strongly recommended.
Which I did strongly recommend.
And thank goodness, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten out that newsletter in December. But again, my only point here is when you're talking about the budget with the neighborhood councils, make that effort to make sure that they're allocating that portion of their budget and they know that they're supposed to do it.
Keep in mind, your activism was probably born of don't tell me what to do. Where's my stuff? And so you must understand that the department has a hard time telling folks what to do without the support of folks that say this is how we think it should be done. But if neighborhood council leaders were to rise up and say that we think that X percentage should be spent on outreach, flat out, I think we'd have a much more significantly effective journey in coaching neighborhood councils and guiding them because of outreach, how much goes to elections. We had neighborhood councils that turned in a budget that had categories 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 100, 200, 300, 400. 500 was missing, 500 for the election. So their budget didn't even acknowledge that it existed as a zero. It was an old form. That's how far from the conversation some are. So as we're pushing and hurting, and it is powerful to have partners on the other side saying, seriously, is it about outreach? So yes, it was, but we're starting a year early now. It's a year away.
Thank goodness.
We're in a much better position in terms of communication and planning and implementing a really solid election season. Yes, Tony, and then Lydia.
The challenge, besides money, of online voting is self-affirmation. Now, I'm in a council that does self-affirmation and one that does documentation, and I really think in-person voting, self-affirmation is the way to go. It works great in West Hills. But as soon as you go online, self-affirmation becomes really challenging. And so at a minimum, I think that there should be some, just as there is in general election, a cutoff for registration. If you don't register, I don't know, a week, 10 days before the election, but registration is cut off because otherwise you're going to have the last minute of use. At least if you have the cutoff, you know where your problems are and can try and address them.
Okay. So a cutoff for security purposes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few ways to address security also. You can look to see where the votes are coming from and find out, oh, it's a library, it's a school, it's a place that should have hundreds of votes coming from that location. So if a bunch of votes were coming in Lincoln Heights and we find out it's a school, great. Looks like they're doing the outreach. And on the other hand, if it's coming from someone's home, then you can track it. Then you say, well, you know, seriously, Captain Bob, you voted 900 times. So for your opponent. So there are ways to check that. And the other thing is you need to decide, because some folks are saying, some neighborhood councils are just eager for slow the bus down and become a stakeholder, and others are obviously much more restrictive. And so that's it. The neighborhood councils are going to have that conversation amongst yourselves, like, you know, are you happy with what we've got? Do you want to change it? Because there's arguments for both, but you should be having that.
I'm going to say for online voting,
Yeah, for online.
cutoff, if you want to walk into the polling place, I'm still, you know, we don't disenfranchise anybody. You can walk into the polling place and self-affirm and get a ballot. It's just for the online voting, it might be.
Panorama City.
North Hills East is self-affirmation.
Oh, okay. So that's, and in Panorama City, you're of two minds.
Well, but no, I say I personally support, I think self-affirmation is a better way to go for in-person voting. I'm having just a question I'm throwing out there. It becomes more challenging with online voting.
So so you're suggesting that we take a look at the cutoff, and that's good feedback. And so when we fine tune the process, we're going to need to really dial in on some of this kind of conversation about cutoffs and when things shift and how we verify. Yes, Commissioner.
Yes, so one of the things I'd like to say is as we start putting the package together, moving forward with the elections, is that parking was one of the most critical issues in the elections that nobody addressed except the people who were complaining, and that was that there just wasn't enough parking, many of the facilities that were chosen. So I'd like to see the department and the people who are helping the neighborhood councils with their elections make sure that they reiterate that when they choose their locations, that the parking and having an exit and entrance are really important and really need to be addressed this time because there were some major issues with parking.
Well, one of the great things about online voting is
No parking?
it will address the fact that a significant population can vote without having to get in a car and drive. Keeping in mind that a significant percentage of LA doesn't have access to a car. So when they did an emergency plan for the city of LA, there's 20% that are not going to be able to drive or get to a car or find their way out in a vehicle. That's a pretty significant. In the spirit of digital equity, we got this on as a recommendation, and in addition, our hope is that this will allow people to participate in greater numbers
Right?
without a greater capacity strain.
Correct, except for you have to also look at the economic diversity of all the communities that do not have computers and will be going in person.
Yeah.
And also, you're talking additional people, that's great, but there's going to be outreach. So many of those additional people would be new people versus people who are used to voting in person may continue that process.
Good point. But, and then,
So I want to get back to the bylaw revision.
Okay.
You don't have to write, well, I guess you could write it if you want to. So I kind of feel like a broken record when I was in IEA, when I was a poll manager from 2012, 2014. The same neighborhood councils complaining about the same thing happening at their elections. I said, well, all you have to do is amend your bylaws so that you don't have people voting for seats that you didn't intend for them to vote. And so my suggestion or recommendation is, and I think I said this at one of the alliance meetings or something, is we need to engage the NEAs, we need to engage you, we need to engage the general managers, we need to make it, you know, the people who are in this meeting are aware of this, it's the people who are not, and Sherman Oaks comes to my mind immediately, in 2 election cycles, that communication needs to go, and people who are working with the neighborhood councils like the NEAs, they've got 2 months basically to get on there. Some have to do 2 readings, February, March, or March, April. So
Coastal Center for 3 readings.
3 readings, okay. Anyway, the point is, time is running out for that process, and I'm really concerned that, I don't want to have this conversation next year of these people, same people complaining to me about the same problems because we didn't, by we, I mean the department, I don't think it's my job. I don't mind doing it after March 3rd, but I really don't think it's my job I really think you've got folks who could just do it because of the NA for the region, because whoever's gonna be in charge of bylaws or comes directly from the general manager, somehow get their attention, especially if you've got a red flag already, knowing these are issues. It's not every neighborhood council, it's certain ones. And that was it.
Okay.
Bylaws.
We got it on the back, let's go back to the commission.
With regard to the possibility of having your neighborhood council majority hijacked by ongoing community interest stakeholders, I would just recommend to everybody that they follow the department's advice and clearly define who community interest people can and can't vote for. Because that's one of the things that come up, that like somebody mentioned, oh, they don't live here. Well, community interest people are allowed to vote, but your bylaws just need to be sure that you've limited and specified how they can. The second point I'd like to make is, for the better part of a year, I've been pretty loudly recommending that the department create an escrow account to smooth out the funding from election year, non-election year, election year, non-election year. And I believe that in non-election years, neighborhood councils ought to be able to deposit approximately half of their anticipated cost of the election during the election year to smooth the budgets. And so far, the bank hasn't done anything, the department hasn't done anything. We're well into the last part of this fiscal year, and I just think that it's critical that to smooth out those expenditures and to make things more rational and smooth, the department should create an escrow account where in the non-election year, you can deposit funds for use in the next election year.
I'd like to add to that, just real world. We spend $6,000 to $7,000 election year. That's an enormous amount to take out in a single year.
We spent 11 or 12.
Okay, Charles.
I was gonna say, as far as the budget goes for the election outreach, I think last time around, we were one of those people with the zero line on for expenditures on election, or we spent very little, even though, I know the recommendation was, something like 10% or whatever it was, so, I don't know, it's, very interesting, to try and, do a better job of outreach when the board's not always willing to spend the money to do so. Even though as it turned out, we wound up, I think, well, I don't know how much we had, that year, I guess we did pretty well as far as spending down our budget, but, it's unpredictable. Sometimes we set the budget at the beginning, each fiscal year at the beginning, and we say, well, have very little for election there, and then they say, well, we can always come back and change it. Well, they never come back and change it. So there's some thoughts there.
Okay, good. One of the things that didn't come up yet was blackout period, and so one of the causes of some concern was that a sitting neighborhood council would put out a newsletter extolling their wonderfulness with a big picture of the sitting board. So should there be a blackout period for promoting the wonderfulness of Captain Bob? 30 days before the election, should there be a blackout period, or 60 days? So the city council, for example, has a blackout. Ethics, restricts them from certain behavior or certain activities if they're candidates, incumbent candidates. And so in this particular case, it'd be a neighborhood council being restricted from certain activities. So certainly do the big newsletter, talk about the elections, or talk about all candidates, like what's the standard. But don't innocently, oh, look, it's a full page fold out of me. Just mentioning how much I've done in the neighborhood, and here I am saving it, and then, the same thing with the election coming up. So that's something for us to discuss, keeping in mind that is it a department, is it an election standard, is it something neighborhood council should self discuss, or can you help us advocate for, if you'd like to see the elections run a certain way, what does that include? Is it, one thing is Ivan was saying that incumbents won't go look for their opposition, but should they also, at the same time, should they have an opportunity an advantage over the opposition?
Can't teach your own farm.
Yeah, so that's something for us to discuss. So we had two hands go up. Yes? Lydia, and then Tony, and then Dave.
Yes, so I want to go back to bylaws.
Okay.
And that is, when the department started saying bylaws, and we're spreading the word that the bylaw window is open, I don't think that the neighborhood councils get specifically that if you have election issues and your bylaws need to address that, it's time to do your bylaws now before the state. Specifically saying it that way, because when you go to neighborhood council and say, oh, if the bylaws window's open, it's time if you have anything that you want to change, they're not thinking that election issue. So I think that the messaging needs to focus on if you have election issues, that your bylaws needed to be addressed, they need to be done within this.
Right, and we will be following up with those. I know some entities have already started to address. I know Sherman has started to address. I don't know if we actually did the final vote, but we will get the list of those that did have issues. That we know Rampart Village, one of the candidates who voted for himself because the qualifications of voter didn't qualify for that. So we're going to ask them to correct those types of things.
Crazy. So it was Tony, and then Dave, and then Mr. Guzman.
I really hope that we don't go to this blackout period, you can't issue newsletters about yourself, because all incumbents have power. You've been up against an incumbent. So that's just what happens. It's the power of incumbency. They don't stop doing things for their city or neighborhood. They don't stop doing so. But imagine all the complaints and cross about they shouldn't have put this newsletter out that we are going to have that will distract from the more positive aspects of the election. I just don't even want to open that whole.
But Tony, you received one of you handled one.
I know. I both 2012 and 2014. I had those. All I'm saying is, if you look at the challenges that I had, but you then make it official that all the IDAs are going to have to deal with complaints like this for every neighborhood council, for everything they put out, every posting on their website, every newsletter they put out. I mean, we have enough trouble with that already without encouragement.
Well, you can have no standard, and then you can pick a line. And so don't stop sending out the newsletter. But if you're going to name names, name the neighborhood council. I mean, that would be a 30-day blackout. So you don't have to say that the neighborhood council just went inert all of a sudden. It disappeared. The neighborhood council's active. It's doing great stuff. I know it's a long drive back to West Valley. You better leave now and get home by Monday.
Well, actually, we're not applying, to be fair, we're not applying our city standard to ourselves. Because when a city is having an election, we cannot name that council person. We say the council district 7 councilman, we can't put that name in, but we do for ourselves.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so as we move forward, we should discuss this, because this is sort of an area where people are confused, and if they think there's an opportunity to challenge, it lets us know that they thought there was a standard, where there was none, but we should clarify where there's a standard. So we did some standards, and we should take a look at those standards. So for example, no mudslinging was unenforceable, right?
Yeah.
I agree with it. I believe in it. I think it should be fun, but you're not allowed to legislate fun because we don't have a standard for it. So we couldn't respond to that challenge because it was just the other thing is motive is tough, action is easy. So I can't prove what you're thinking or intending, but I know what you're doing. So we can be clear on what we're going to address as we move forward. But there's obviously a lot of opportunity to address some of the things that came up this past time. I just wanted to point out there was one more that I didn't think we hit.
I thought there was a city attorney ruling as neighborhood councils deal with all candidates, not just neighborhood council, but fundamentally doing a newsletter promoting neighborhood council is one thing, but featuring the incumbent members on the front page of a newsletter without mentioning any mention whatsoever to the candidates seems fundamentally in opposition to the city, unfair, but also in opposition to what the city attorney's ruling was.
Yeah.
For how neighborhood councils deal with candidates for public office.
Let's have that discussion in advance and clarify. Mr. Guzman?
No, Dave was first.
Oh, Dave, sorry. Dave, we've been waiting.
I'm taking a step back here and looking. The most advantageous thing is to get a sufficient quantity of candidates running for election, subcategory qualified. And if I can plagiarize a portion of Tony's point, keep it positive. Mission Hill CPAB just went through a little bit of a mental reorientation, and it's working very, very well. Our neighbor council, North Hills West, perhaps is one of the biggest test cases for positive mental reorientation. And we've really been working on that with varying degrees of success. So where's that going to take us? Dollar-wise, biggest, most important chunk of the budget. Election year is outreach. Period. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's complementary. It works. But anything and everything that can go in that direction, the rallying the valley, and to motivate people, to inform them. I have neighbors that didn't know we had a neighborhood council. I didn't know 4 years ago. I didn't know. So, novice first time around. When Ivan said, "What are you going to get the candidates to bring in the incumbents to bring in candidates?" I did. I brought in 3 candidates. 2 are still there. I still got elected, so I've been trying to get fired ever since.
Go, be good. Yes, sir.
I just thought of a problem that we have, and I'm not sure the best solution or address of it, either because of the box rules or the department's rules or the city clerk's rules or maybe my own neighborhood council's rules or procedures or something. We had a rule that people running for office could not be part of the elections committee. And because we elect all our people at the same time, and where the great majority of our people were running again, we had a hard time getting people to be on the elections committee, especially competent people. And the only people that we ended up with were former board members who aren't on the board, or current board members who are so dissatisfied they're not going to run again, or kind of newbies who didn't have any experience. And I'm not sure what the best solution is. I don't want candidates, whether they're incumbents or not, to be able to manipulate the elections process. On the other hand, our elections committee didn't find itself to be particularly distinguished, and I'm not sure the best way to get the best people in. Maybe if there were some kind of rules about what can and can't be done, or you know, maybe we could have used a greater portion of our leadership, but almost all of our leadership was prevented from participating in the elections committee, which meant our elections committee was pretty inferior, inadequate, and incompetent.
Is that a rule of Rampart Village, or was that the mythology cloud that a lot of folks kept saying you can't?
I don't know. I just confessed. I don't know if it's in one of the rules we've adopted or anything.
Yeah.
And to an earlier point where we were talking about IEAs, when Glenn presented, I inserted, have one for everyone. You know, I think you need an IEA, and I think you need a vice IEA. In my own election, we had somebody appointed as IEA who I think attended 2 of our election-related meetings and the election, and all of the other activities were run by somebody who was never appointed, because 2 pals got together and tag teamed to cover NC election activities. But the person who made almost all the decisions with regard to what was happening with regard to my elections was not my IEA, and he was not a vice IEA. So not only in our earlier discussion about having an IEA, I want a vice IEA so that if the main principal can't be there, there's somebody else. But I don't want somebody who has no authority at all, who wasn't appointed to anything, to be able to boss my election committee around.
Okay, just for the record, your election committee should be active now. Like, go back, start on the bylaws, get election committee. And if your neighborhood council is barring people from participating, you're hobbling yourself right out of the gate. And then when you become a candidate, I mean, you're not a candidate now. So there was no rule about sitting board members, you know, being restricted if they were going to be a candidate. You can't work the polls. But the election committee's work takes place well in advance. A lot of it's making good decisions, a lot of it's coming up with a strategy and a plan, a lot of it's getting things, your ducks in a row well in advance. The outreach committee is working all the way through, but the election committee, when it comes down to it, you pass it off to the volunteers from your neighbor councils or folks that aren't on your board or aren't candidates to run the actual elections. So the idea that...
So only poll workers are restricted?
Well, yeah, you can. If you're a candidate, you're
Well,
not...
I was just asking.
Yeah.
It's only the poll working that's restricted, but the committee itself, there's no done or bonk restriction at all?
Up to the day before the election.
So some neighborhood council candidates were the ones that were setting up the parking lot, but they just had to run. Like, we're getting there, see you later. Some of them dropped off food at the edge of the parking lot, didn't want to cross the line, but here's the food. You know, so the idea that, you know, so like, you know, who set up the tent? It was all set up. And then people came in and ran the elections. But anyway, so we're going to wrap it. Gracie, I'm sorry, Mr. Guzman.
Okay, this is a question that hopefully Gracie can answer. I ran into this first time September 9, 2013, when there was a Bonk Commission meeting, and it talked about on the agenda the neighborhood councils having to change their bylaws and add something in. And what I found very, very disconcerting about that is I had also recently found out that there was a moratorium against changes to the bylaws. So I find that there's a big disconnect between what happens up here and what happens down here. So, the best example I can give you, and I don't know why we have moratoriums, I want to know why we have moratoriums, because I don't see any reason why neighborhood council shouldn't be able to submit revisions to their bylaws at any time of year if they've been approved by their board. But here comes my problem as a stakeholder. Board of Neighborhood Commissioners gets together, they pass a resolution. The resolution becomes a done requirement for the neighborhood councils, using, for example, the agenda posting requirements. And at the very end of the resolution, it says that these requirements are hereby amended to each neighborhood council's bylaws. Okay, so we've got a document here that says it's included in your bylaws that are over here. But if the people that are responsible for revising these bylaws cannot take what's supposed to be in them now from this resolution and put them into their bylaws because there's a moratorium, then how am I as a stakeholder who didn't know about the Bonk resolution that was passed, but I'm just going to the website and reading the bylaws, how am I to know that there's another rule that is part of the bylaws that's not in the bylaws?
No current moratorium, May 1st.
Well, what I'm saying is there should never be a moratorium.
Well, I agree with that, but practically for election season, there has to be some moratorium.
Well,
but we're not currently.
But again, the moratorium isn't specifically for the elections. The moratorium is for all and any changes to the bylaws. So I would like to get the answer to the reason for a moratorium.
So the initial reason for moratorium was literally because we had been cut by 60%. You're right. Prior to that, in before 2009, 2010. We took bylaws in whenever, bylaw amendment changes. After that, we literally didn't have the staffing to keep maintaining that type of service. Then when the elections went to city clerk in 2010, it made sense too to do the moratorium because they needed a lock on the bylaws and the board structure prior to the elections. So we basically maintained that for that reason alone. So you'll see that once the elections are over, we basically lift the moratorium for the whole year that's a non-election. As for your question regarding the changes and the policies that append to a bylaws, what we've been doing, and first thing, maybe the change was a stakeholder definition. When there is a policy of the commission that changes all of the neighborhood council bylaws, we now go in there and we make the updates for all the NCs. Because it's easier for the NCs, it's already technically laid upon their bylaws anyway. So the two that we haven't been able to get to, just because of staffing issues, is the posting policy and code of conduct. So we are planning to do that, and some NCs are already doing it themselves. They don't kind of like us going in there and tinkering, even though we're just literally saying follow the commission bylaws or commission policy. we're gonna be trying to do that all before the final moratorium.
Okay, just thank you for explaining that. It helps me understand it a little bit better. There is one little caveat. When you talk about putting the agenda posting requirements, appending them into the bylaws, you have to remember that all the neighborhood councils chose one of two options. And so that's what needs to be in the bylaws, not your whole thing, but whatever that neighborhood
Yes.
council voted on and chose. And so these are things that me as a stakeholder, I want that information on that bylaws to be current, up to date, no question about some resolution that didn't get included. I need to, it's important to have the whole thing.
No, I agree. It used to be a tons, I mean, election stuff used to be somewhere else. It's only in the last, literally probably 3 years that we've gotten the bylaws to the point where it has most of the stuff, except for the commission policies right now. You're right, with the agenda posting, the neighborhood councils do have to state whether or not they are going to maintain the 5 posting locations.
Yes,
Or they,
and this is a real disconnect. They've
Right.
already voted to do the one and the website, but their bylaws still they say there's
Right.
5 posting
Well, that's-
locations. Which are they really abiding by?
Yeah, so they will have to make a firm which one they're going to do.
Again, it's just a feeling there's, and as Glenn pointed out in his way, there's a lot of neighborhood councils that don't know that they should be putting this stuff in there because they're not getting the communication from up here.
They're getting it, they're just not paying attention.
Well, yeah.
Well,
So
okay.
Tony, then Chris, and then
Vamos?
Probably.
Gracie will,
Mr. Kuzman and the lady commissioner will disagree strongly with me, but I think that this effort to take Board of Neighborhood Commissioners' policies and turn them into bylaws appendixes is wrong on 2 counts. First of all, it's just a lot of unnecessary labor. Second of all, is bylaws shouldn't be changing all the time. They're not procedure manuals. It's beginning to change the bylaws into a procedure manual. If you say in the bylaws that we will adopt the posting policy, will adhere to the state posting policy and any policies issued by the board, then the public only has to go one place to find it, not 96. I really, and the code of conduct, which is not completely finished, and you may want to tweak them and then change, and then you're going to have to go back and change the bylaws.
We've been very, we're trying to put in the broad language, like basically posting, neighborhood council shall post pursuant to, the board neighborhood commission.
Right, and
I'm doing.
And I feel the same as for the code of conduct. I think that whatever code of conduct, just in general statements, and then the actual code of conduct can change without you having to redo the bylaws.
Yes.
Okay, that's my point.
all right, ladies and gentlemen, my partner in elections, Chris Gursky, what were you going to say?
I thought it was interesting about the discussion about changes to bylaws and stuff, and I just wanted to chime in. Our election code that we have for the city, we have a 6-month delay anytime we make a change to the election code. From the office, we always wait till after the elections to make any sort of changes to the election code, and sometimes we're required to change the code while we're in the process of getting ready for an election. But that 6-month delay is to ensure that, we're not changing the code for the current election. It's like a buffer, so where we can still change it, but it won't affect the upcoming election. And that's just, a thought I had about bylaws being changed, that won't have an effect on the current election, but will still allow entities to continue on with their work. That's just an idea.
So Chris is with the city clerk. City clerk handled candidate registration last year and vote by mail and ballot design. One of the things about the timeline in the moratorium, we can't have board seat structure changing after the registration and ballot voting model process has started. So some of the invisible timelines are so that we can start the process well in advance and design it so that you can enter an address and a qualification to get a ballot. And then we can't go in and start redoing that process with small little changes, a seat here, a seat there, So the idea of having so whether it's a moratorium or that there's just a delay, so any changes take place for the next round,